Captain Raghu Raman. Captain Raman has led across three demanding leadership environments: the military, corporate sector, and the government. During his army stint, Captain Raman has served in Punjab battling terrorists, in Saichen as a complex commander, and as a UN peacekeeper in war-torn Angola. His final stint was as an instructor in the prestigious School of Armed Warfare. His 4 decades career spans the hierarchy-driven culture of the armed forces, incentive-led organizations such as Mahindra, Reliance, Adani, and the process-oriented world of bureaucracy. He has founded and led companies including complex global joint ventures and was handpicked by the Government of India as the founding CEO of the National Intelligence Grid, created after the 26/11 attacks, at the rank of Secretary of GOI. This breadth of experience gives Captain Raman rare insight into leadership, strategy, and transformation. A trusted advisor to national and global leaders, he is a prominent voice on platforms such as TEDx and Josh, with talks and podcasts viewed over 100 million times and used as case studies in leadership forums. He is visiting faculty at several premier institutions, including the IIM, ISB, Emeritus, and the Indian Institute of Public Administration. And of course, several armed forces institutions, including National Defence College and College of Air Warfare. Captain Raman is the best-selling author of Every Man's War. He anchored a leadership program for the Adani Group aimed at developing 75 CEOs in 2 years and hosted NDTV's show Wisdom of Leaders. On behalf of Sneha Saurabha, we extend a warm and hearty welcome to Captain Raghu Raman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Captain Raghu Raman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. So I was listening to the 2 speakers before me. My daughter's name is also Aishwarya. So among other qualifications, I'm Aishwarya's father. Not somebody else's daughter. So, thank you so much. எனக்கு தமிழ் பேச தெரியும், எனக்கு மலையாளம் சம்சாரிக்க அறியாம், Kannada I am going to learn. Okay? So, and I've got 2 friends, Rakesh and Anand, who have promised to teach me Kannada. I'm moving to Bangalore, so I'll have to learn Kannada. Thank you for this wonderful introduction and this opportunity to speak with you. You heard my introduction. I have spent 12 and a half years in the army. I have also spent almost 25 to 28 years in the corporate world. And I have spent 5 years in the government of India also. So many of my friends ask me that this government, army, private sector, which is the most difficult profession you have? So I tell them I don't know the answer to that one, but the easiest one was the army. Because in the army, at least you knew which side your enemy is. In corporate and private sector, government, many times you don't know where your enemy is. Is the front, behind, where is the enemy? Yes. But I found that in all these 3 different environments, there are some things which are very common in organizations. Whether it's a small organization, small family, small business, or large organization, I have worked with very, very big organizations also. I found that there were 3 or 4 diseases that organizations start getting when they become bigger. So let me tell you the story of these 3 diseases, and I'll begin the story with an incident that happened on the 2nd of January 2016. Many of you may not remember it, that there was a terror attack in the Pathankot Air Base. Some of you may have read in the newspaper or seen it in the news. Now it was a very, very dangerous attack because, as you are aware, Pathankot Air Base is where many of our fighter jets are kept. And there was a similar attack that took place in Colombo Airport in the year 2001, which was successful. And a lot of aircrafts were destroyed. The Sri Lankan economy suffered. It was a very damaging attack. This attack, however, did not succeed because our security guards were better or luckier or whatever, the attack did not succeed. So I didn't want to tell you that story. The story I wanted to tell you is that 3 days after the attack, this newspaper report came. Okay, slider is not working. The report said that around our premier air base, the walls of the air base were not built properly. Now when you see this report, you get a little surprised. Arey, apna premier air base ke aaspas ka the wall which is made, how it could not have been made. But 1 month later, one more report came which was even more surprising, that, okay, either you do it or I'll do it. If both of us do it, it's not going to work. Yeah? Can you go back a slide? Yeah. Can you put the laptop here? It'll be easier for me to do it. You cannot do it, okay. One more slide back. So the report that came was that same department which has not built the wall has returned almost 40,000 crores of money to the exchequer. So you cannot say that paisa nahi tha. You didn't have money to make the wall. And the same story you hear, there is tons of food that is wasted every year because Food Corporation of India does not have enough storage space. But Shipping Corporation of India has got empty containers which can contain grain. After all, grain is contained in containers when it's being shipped around the world. And yet the Food Corporation of India, the Shipping Corporation of India, though the secretaries meet each other all the time, they are not able to make it happen. Same is true for thousands of vacancies in schools. There are not enough teachers to fill it. There are thousands of teachers who are fully qualified, but they're not getting jobs. Why does this happen? Why does the right hand and the left hand in organizations, companies, small outfits, why they are not able to handshake with each other? This is the question that I've been trying to answer and discover for quite some time. So I have an idea about it. Why doesn't the pointer work with the laptop? You know, after all those rehearsals, you do so many things. Why does this not happen? Now I'll give you my take on it. Can we move the slide? Is working now? Oh yes, it's working now. I think I'll have to go closer. Good. So these are these 4 diseases which I think are affecting organizations. I will explain each disease one by one. And these diseases are familiar, at least to the ones who are older amongst us. We are familiar with diseases. The first one is Alzheimer. The second one is coronary hardening. Oh, sorry. First one is arthritis. See, I'm getting Alzheimer. First one is arthritis. Second is coronary hardening. Third is Alzheimer. And the fourth is renal failure. I'll explain what this is in terms of organization. So let's begin with arthritis first. Now this is a very big ship. Those of you who know a little bit about hydrocarbon or know energy will recognize this ship is called a VLCC. VLCC means very large crude carrier. So a very large crude carrier is sailing in uncharted waters. Because future is uncharted. We don't know when COVID will happen. ChatGPT will come, AI will take away jobs, Gen Z will come, change the workplace. All of these things we don't know. So when the ship is sailing through uncharted waters, there is a lookout who is usually a junior officer, is standing on top looking with his binoculars, looking in front, and suddenly he sees an iceberg ahead. So he shouts on the radio, there is a very big iceberg ahead. So what do you think is happening in the control room now, as soon as this information comes? What will happen in the control room? Anybody? Sorry? Confusion will happen, but control room has experienced captains and experienced senior leaders, very, very senior leaders. So what will happen then next? Sorry? Stop? No, not so soon. Because oil tanker you can't stop. Oil tanker you have to avoid the iceberg. So now debate will begin. Do we turn right or do we turn left? Because if we turn right, certain divisions will have to close down, certain people will have to be retrenched, your office location will have to move from Mysore to Bangalore, whatever. If you turn left, there will be certain other decisions which will have to, the debate will continue. Right, left, right. The right lobby will say towards the right, the left lobby will say towards. All this while, the window during which you can execute a successful turn, that window is becoming smaller or larger? Smaller and smaller and smaller, and finally in the 11th hour when there is no option left, a command will be given, hard turn right, and the nose of the ship will miss it, but the back will go and hit the iceberg. Ta-da! And suddenly there will be a breach and water will start coming in, and when water starts coming in, the ship will start listing to the left. Now this is visible to everybody. People who are standing on the deck, they can feel it. The outsiders can see this ship is teda, it is going in circles. So the leadership of the ship will have to straighten the ship in mid-sea. The only way to straighten the ship in the mid-sea is to flood the right-hand hold. Now both the right and the left-hand holds are flooded. The ship will become straight, but the drag will increase and the speed will slow down. This will now create another situation that outsiders can see the ship is slowing down, business is not doing so well, economy is not going high, no more investments are coming. So you will start pumping in more fuel into the engine of that ship to retain the same speed that you had 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago. If you put your hand to your heart, you realize despite ChatGPT, ERP, technology, email, we are actually becoming slower and slower. It takes more time to procure 100 crores, 10 crores worth of equipment. It takes more time to file your documents. It takes more time to give out an offer letter. It takes more time to do everything now than it used to take 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, because the first thing that happens in organization as it starts growing, it starts getting arthritis. This is arthritis. For a long period of time, my career, okay, I'll have to throw it there, I think. Yeah, my career was in counter-terror. So my job was to degrade the performance of organizations, not to make the performance of organizations better, but to degrade it, not that degraded. Okay, we are doing something else now. No? Sorry? Oh, okay, can you go to the next one? Yes. Now, we discovered that if we try to liquidate these people you see in the org structure, the performance of the organization does not degrade too much. Because as you can make out, most of them are individual contributors. They are just contributing individually in the organization. But instead of these people, if we took out these set of people, now something else happened. Now you found that the organization's performance, brother, please don't do anything. Let me do it from here. Okay. Now you find that the organization's performance degrades a lot because as you can make out, these are individuals who are nodal engines. They are making information transfer happen. They are making files move. They are the ones who are actually transporting the information around. So I just thought that if instead of degrading the organization, my goal was to make the organization much more bonded, to make them much more fluid, then what is the kind of organization we would create? We would create an organization where everyone is connected to each other, where people know each other as human beings, not as portfolio holders. So in an organization, I've seen so many times Vice President Sales is talking to Vice President Marketing is talking to Vice President Photocopier, but they're not human beings talking to each other. They're playing office with each other. They're taking a mail from somebody, sending it to someone, CCing it to another 200 people. They are not trying to resolve a problem, they are only trying to resolve their own situation, their own remits. This happens in government, this happens in private sector, this happens in large organizations. I'm sure to a certain extent it happens here also. That you feel a lot of your energy is being dissipated in just managing the traffic internally rather than achieving an objective. Now I found that there are two ways in an organization where you can make the bonds much stronger, and the Rotarian setup kind of is similar to that, the attempt to do that. And one of the best ways is to know the backstory of the individuals with whom you are going to be working. So you all recognize this person? Yes? No? Yes? Who is it? Shakuni. So you recognize, how did you recognize Shakuni? How did you make out is Shakuni? Huh? With the dice and all, you can make out. Now how many of you know the backstory of Shakuni? Shakuni's story, yes, some people here know it. So most people think that Shakuni is a villain and the entire Mahabharata happened because of Shakuni. But if you actually go to the backstory of Shakuni, Shakuni is the son of the king of Afghanistan. The king of Afghanistan's name is Shambhal. And Chambal has got a sister who is the queen of Kandahar, and she is known as Kandhari. So Shakuni is a 6-year-old boy when this story starts. At that point, Dhritarashtra, who is a blind and an impotent king, wants to marry the most beautiful woman in the world. That's his logic. So he tells Shambal that I want to marry your sister. So Shambal is a good brother. So he tells the Dhritarashtra, go take a walk. But Dhritarashtra has got the most powerful general with him, Bhishma Pitama. So he sent Bhishma to Afghanistan, and Bhishma conquers Afghanistan, captures the entire clan and brings Gandhari back, and Gandhari is forcibly married to Dhritarashtra. Don't believe your Amar Chandra Katha story. She is actually forcibly married, which is one of the 7 ways of marriage according to Manuskriti. Now, you are aware Dhritarashtra is also blind. So he has another condition that if I cannot see other men, how can you see I cannot see other women, you cannot see other men. So she also has to put her bandage in her eyes. Again, don't believe Amar Chandra Katha, because if you read the Mahabharata in detail, you will discover that Gandhari has actually got the phobia of darkness. She cannot sleep in a room until a lamp is placed. So she is now subjected to the biggest phobia of her life for the rest of her life. Now, in the north of India, there is this system called Mangalik. I don't know whether it's there in south also. And so is there? So under Mangalik, if a woman is born, again affects only women, not men. So if a woman is born under this Mangalik star or whatever, then she is first married to a tree, and then the tree is chopped off, and then she is married to her husband. Now in Afghanistan, they do it with goats. So Gandhari is actually, technically speaking, a widow. And Dhritarashtra discovers this. And when he discovers it, he becomes so angry that he sentences the entire family of Gandhari to death. And death by slow starvation, which means they will be given 1 nivala of food every day to prolong their agony. Now I want you to visualize this mind of this 6-year-old boy who is inside a dungeon, inside a prison. And he sees his entire family that is locked up there. And one by one the family is dying, children are dying because they are not getting. By this time Shambal decides, he calls the whole family together and says, one of us must survive to take revenge. And he makes a test inside the prison. The test is, anyone who can thread a grain of rice, who can put a thread through a grain of rice, that is the person we will choose to survive. And Shakuni manages to do that. I will tell you in the end how he manages to do that. Now visualize the small boy's mindset, his psyche, when he is seeing each and every member of his family who are holding that one piece of food that they get, and when the jailer goes away, they take that food and give it to this child, and one by one, each one of them dies of starvation until only Shakuni and Shambal are left alive. Shambal because he is a strong man, and Shakuni because he is being fed. So by this time, Gandhari manages to convince Dhritarashtra that leave at least one male member alive, so that Vansh does not get destroyed. So Dhritarashtra agrees that I will spare the life of Shakuni. He will be sent as the prince of Kandahar, and Shambal will be executed. So last night, when Shakuni and his father are spending the night in the dungeon together, the father is explaining to the son that you have a role in life, you have a purpose in life, which you will forget as soon as you go to Kandahar because of that rich pomp and show, this, that, you will forget. So the boy says, no, I'll remember this. He says, that's what you're saying right now. But when you will go there in that pomp and show, you will completely forget. So I have to do something to you by which you will remember what the true purpose of your life is each and every day. And it is the father Shambal keeps the son on a stone bed and breaks every bone in his body, blinds him in one eye, cripples him, so that he will have no objective in his life other than seeking vengeance. Now I'll tell you how Shakuni managed to thread the grain of rice. He took that grain of rice and he plugged a hole in the wall through which ants used to come in inside the dungeon. And it's the ants that make a hole through the grain of rice. Shakuni has nothing against the Pandavas. He has no enmity against the Pandavas. Matter of fact, he is the one who saves the Pandavas from the Lakh Palace by warning them that this is a trap. He is just using the Pandavas to bore through the Kauravas exactly like his family, exactly like the ants bored through the ant. to the rise. Now that you know Shakuni's backstory, how many of you still think he is a villain? मैं होता तो इससे ज़्यादा करता. I would have done much more than this. When you know a person's backstory, you suddenly realize why that person is thinking that way, why the person does not agree with you, why the person has a different set of views, why the person believes a certain set of people are not good, not bad. Because we don't know each other's backstory, we automatically, now put your hand to your heart and tell me how many of your friends know your backstory? Do they know your backstory? No, that is why they think you are Shakuni. Right? If only they knew your backstory, they will think you are a hero. So very, very important for people to know each other's backstory. Now, how will you know each other's backstory? What is the way to do that? One of the ways which we found in the army was that if you put a group of people through severe trauma, they will by definition know each other's backstory. Now, severe trauma does not mean you have to traumatize them. Any traumatic event that happens in which you are together, though people who are together, they will become really, really bonded. You remember exactly where you were sitting on the day the Ahmedabad aircraft crashed. When the Air India plane crashed in Ahmedabad, you remember exactly where you were, first message you got, first message you sent out. You remember where you were on 26/11. You remember or no? It happened 16 years ago. And you still remember where you were. If I ask you where were you last Thursday, you'll have to check your smartphone. Why? Because last Thursday no trauma happened. But when trauma happened, so how many of you are from Bombay or been to Bombay? I'm sure many of you must have been to Bombay. You remember that in 2005, there was a major tsunami which happened. Almost a tsunami, like it was the rains that happened in Bombay, and more than 1,000 people died. And people were trapped in the cars, all of that. Now, I often think about it that if you are going in a journey with somebody on a car, let's say you're going to office or you're going to from here to Bangalore, you will come to know something about that person during that time when you're traveling. A little bit of information you will exchange. But if you're caught with that person for 16 hours and not knowing whether you'll get out alive or not, the kind of bonding that will happen between you will be the kind of bonding that will stay for life. Why? Because that bonding has been forged in trauma. Now, okay, I know what's happening here. As we look at organizations' evolution over the last 20, 30, 40 years, we have also seen how leadership styles have changed. We all grew up, at least I grew up, and most of the people sitting in the front row grew up in a very authoritarian style of leadership. We joined an organization at the lowest level. I joined as a second lieutenant, became a lieutenant, then a captain, then a major, and you go on to become a general at that. So one day when you have white hair, or in some cases no hair, then you are supposed to be a person who is smarter than a person who's got black hair. And this system worked very well when ecosystem did not change. In old industries, it still works well. In manufacturing, cement, those kind of industries, it works well. But somewhere in the 90s, we had a major IT revolution, and you all know it because it happened next door in Bangalore. And now you needed leaders who may not be able to do the programming. Like Nandan Nilekani must have learned his programming in Fortran and COBOL and basic language. And now he was running an organization where there are thousands of young kids who were far better than him in coding. So like Ramakant Acharekar, how many of you know the name? Ramakant Acharekar? Yes. Some of you know the name, yeah. So Ramakant Acharekar, for those of you who don't know, was a cricketer who in his entire career played only one first-class cricket match. Only one match. Hyderabad versus SBI. That's it. But he was also a great coach, and he went on to create cricketers like Sachin Tendulkar, Ajit Agarkar, Kambli. So even though he could not score a century to save his life, he was able to create an environment in which he was able to create great cricketers, great batsmen, because he was an excellent coach. He was a very good teacher. But I think the kind of leadership we will require in the future, which was very aptly demonstrated by one of the future leaders few minutes ago, who wanted her own identity and not her father's identity, That generation, if we have to lead, we have to become like a gardener leader. How many of you are interested in gardening? Nobody? Yes. So those who are interested in gardening know, sir, that the gardener looks at his or her job as creating the right environments for the plants to flourish in the garden. So a gardener will make sure that plants have got adequate distance from each other so that one plant's growth is not overshadowing another plant's growth. Happens in garden, also happens in organizations. The second responsibility of the gardener would be to remove the vermin, the insects that do not allow plants to grow. Happens in the garden, happens in companies also, organizations also. But very rarely will you see a gardener shouting at a cactus plant, "Hey buddy, look, you cactus, all thorns, thorns, look at the rose will get promoted, he will become a CEO, you will not." Very rarely, because a gardener knows that though bamboo looks like sugarcane, you can't take juice out of bamboo, and though sugarcane looks like bamboo, you can't build houses with sugarcane. So a gardener realizes that every plant has its own way of growing, and if you are growing a garden, every plant needs to be allowed to grow in their own identity, almost like growing a family where every child has to be allowed to grow in their own way. A gardener will never confuse his or her job with a farmer where every plant has to look exactly like each other. And this is the difference, I think, in leadership of the generations that we grew in, where everything that we had to do was decided by our parents, where to study, which school to go to, who to marry. All those things were decided. I think in the generation now, unless we have a mindset change of leadership to say this is a gardening generation, and here every plant needs to be allowed to grow in their own way, I think we'll find leadership failing. And there is a need to do this now. The need to do this is because leadership in today's generation, companies in today's generation are going to compete on the basis of innovation and creativity. I'll explain it to you why this is important. This is important because you all know which company this is? No, I know it is Apple, but it is an automotive company, pharmaceutical company, technology company. What kind of company is it? Technology company. So most people will say this is a technology company because they make technology. Computer, iWatch, this, that. But actually when you look at it very closely, you realize that is not true. It is not a technology company alone. Sorry. It is actually a life experience company. Why, I'll tell you. Steve Jobs was personally very, very fond of calligraphy. Calligraphy is the art of beautiful handwriting. I know the old generation knew it, fountain pen and all of that. Calligraphy, the young generation doesn't even know what is handwriting. It's all typing. And the next one, Gen Alpha, will be speaking. And the Gen after that, Beta, won't even speak. They won't talk all day. Okay? But he was fond of handwriting. And because of the handwriting, you find that the Apple environment has everything to do with beauty, desktop publishing, fonts, beautiful things. They will all be part of the Mac platform. Similarly, he was a practicing Buddhist himself. He came to India actually. He was a practicing Buddhist, and that is why you find the Apple design is very Zen. Only one button, switch it on, switch it off. No opening inside, taking battery out, and none of that. He brought leaders from organizations like Burberry and Gap to give Apple that high-end finish. And even the packaging of Apple products, ladies will back me up on this, it reminds you almost of perfume. That is the way the packaging is done. This is not a technology company, this is the life experience company, because Samsung can compete on technology, Gorilla Glass, pixel, processor speed. They cannot compete against the concept of beautiful. Because what Steve Jobs did was to take all of these disciplines together and compress them into something which became very difficult to compete with. And matter of fact, many times, can you go to the next slide, please? Many times when I speak to young leaders, I tell them this, that you are aware that to be earning the maximum, You have to be in the top 1% of your profession. We know this. This is a known fact that it's only the top 1% of singers who make money, only the top 1% of authors, top 1% of cricketers. So really to make money, you have to be in the top 1%. So if you are a chartered accountant and you want to be a rich chartered accountant, you have to be in the top 1% of your profession. But if you are even a half decent chartered accountant who knows Mandarin or who knows Arabic, you will suddenly become a niche where you will be paid very, very high. So there's the old saying that we all were taught when we were young. Jack of all trades, master of. But the full proverb is something else. The full proverb is the jack of all trades and the master of none, but oftentimes far, far better than being just a master of one. So the second concept of leadership, I think, is the ability to fuse different disciplines, and that will only happen in an environment which is safe, which people, even the youngest person there, can give an idea without being, afraid that they will be shot down or their idea will be dissed. So we need people who are from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ways of thinking, and only then we will be able to achieve this fusion that is critical to having any form of creativity. I'm going to skip one or two slides because the speaker before me covered it. I was going to talk about the mindset difference of Gen Z from our generation, and you find that in every way they are going to be different, but one of the most important ways in which they're going to be different is they're going to have far more courage to question authority. So a few months ago on 2nd October, I was in Delhi attending a very elaborate panel in which there were many politicians were sitting talking about, it was Gandhi Jayanti obviously, so they were talking about Gandhi's values, and each one of the speakers who was sitting in the dais was telling a bunch of students who were sitting in the auditorium that they should follow Gandhi's values, they should follow Gandhi's values. So one of the kids stood up, and sometimes when politicians say any questions, they should not say it because people will ask questions, So this kid stood up and asked a question, "Sir, you keep telling us to follow Gandhi's values. Why don't you follow Gandhi's values and tell us to follow you? Why are you asking us to follow Gandhi? You follow Gandhi and ask us to follow you." Now this is going to be a reality of leadership as we go forward. We will have followers who will challenge us and challenge our lies, challenge our hypocrisy. So I don't think our generation, we keep calling ourselves the cusp generation who's touching the old tradition and seeing ChatGPT on the other side. We will also be that generation who will be compelled to do away with the hypocrisy, do away with the lies, and actually confront the truth if we have to hold respect of our next generation. So, the last piece I want to cover, last two pieces. One is the importance of narrating stories, because after all, how do you cure Alzheimer? If you have to cure Alzheimer of an organization or of a family, you have to tell stories of that family to the next generation, because that is the only way. I'm pretty sure, it's sad, but it is true, that if we were to ask our children details about their own grandfather, great-grandfather, so you forget, but grandfather also, they perhaps will not know much of the information. And whose accountability is that? Who is responsible for it? Who holds the responsibility of taking the wisdom of our tribal leaders and passing it down to our next generation? I think it's our generation which has to master this art of storytelling which our grandmother used to have. We have forgotten it now. We do in shorts and WhatsApp forwards, but we have forgotten the narratives of our own families. This is a very beautiful story that I very often illustrate, especially in engineering colleges and very well educated environments like this one. This story goes back almost 25 years in a place in Kerala called Ambalappuzha. I'm sure many of you know Ambalappuzha. Yes? No? Anybody has gone houseboating? Yeah. So if you have gone houseboating, you have not to Ambalappuzha. That's where the boating happens. So this is also the district where there are deep sea fishermen who go to the sea, deep sea for fishing. And so 25 years ago, there was an IAS officer, my friend, who was a young probationer who had some surplus funds. So he bought these fishermen GPSs, so that in case they get lost in the storm or something, they can use the GPS to navigate back home. Now my friend forgot that these fishermen were the progeny of several years, decades, centuries of ocean-going fisher folk who did not need this GPS. They could look at the cloud, they could look at the water, the way the fish were moving, whatever, they could find their way back. So a complete waste of money. So we thought. But this is what the fishermen did. They went to the fish market, they collected all the garbage, rotting vegetables, you know what a fish market looks like, took all that garbage, everything, stuffed it into gunny sacks, and took those gunny sacks into the mid-sea, dropped that and marked that spot with a GPS. So that when they came back the next day, the place was full of fish which had been attracted by this garbage. So my educated, erudite friend had given them a device to navigate back home, and my illiterate country cousins used it to navigate into the sea, to manage the fish supply, demand, carbon footprint, all of those things they were able to manage. So many times when we think that new technology is coming, new ideas are coming, it is always a good idea to go back to the tribal knowledge and keep searching for the tribal knowledge, because in our own tribal knowledge, we'll find a lot of wisdom which is being repackaged now and being given back to us as if there is some new science that has come from the West or from modern medicine and all of that. Many of the basic health principles that we now follow, eating intermittent fasting and all of those things, were something that were always a part of our culture, always a part of our DNA. We just need to revive it and remember it all over again, and the best way to do that is through stories. I'll now skip to the fourth disease, which is renal failure. Can we just move the slides ahead, please? Yeah, go ahead. Just keep going ahead. Keep going ahead. Yeah, just go back one slide before. One more point I wanted to bring out, and this is an interesting point to illustrate, that very often when we think that these new technologies are coming, we get a little dazzled by these new technologies and forget that a lot of the technologies are based on old principles, and we can use the old principles to visualize what the technology can do in the future. So I will ask you this question. How many of you have ever sat in a driverless vehicle? No driver. Vehicle will take you from one place to another, but no driver in the vehicle. How many? Raise your hands, please. Yes, sir. Where, sir? US? In US. US. Anybody else? Okay. Now, I bet that each one of us has been in a driverless vehicle. Some of you may have been in it today only. It is called a lift. Yeah? You've been in a lift, no? You press a button, it takes you to whichever floor you want to go. Technically speaking, it's a driverless vehicle. It is going vertical instead of going horizontal. But that vertical change itself changed the demography of cities. It changed the face of Bangalore. It changed the face of Dubai. It changed the face of Skyline. So the concept of a driverless vehicle is not new. The concept is more than 70 years old, 80 years old. Its orientation has become new. So when we see these kind of new technologies, we must not get flustered by it, because these are it's only a question of reframing it and saying in the future, it is going to look different, and this is the way it is going to change the future. Exactly like the lift changed the future of demography, the future of city planning, the future of roads. Similarly, this will change the future, but it is not something that we have never ever encountered before. The last story I wanted to tell you is this importance of flushing out toxins from within our organization, within our family, within our body. And I will tell you again a story from my army days. So when I was a young lieutenant, barely 1 month old into the battalion, my battalion won the divisional basketball match. Now it's a very, very big thing in the army. Any army folk here will tell you that if you win the div competition, it's a big thing. And in a basketball team, there are only 5 players. 3 of those players were from my platoon. I still remember their names, Kishan Singh, Devi Lal, Hanchan. All 3 were from my platoon. So when we win this major celebration taking place in the battalion, this, that, these 3 came running up to me and said, "Saab, outpass de do, Saab, outpass de do." I'll explain what that means. Because we are a combat unit deployed in the field, we cannot give leave at that point of time. We can give what is called outpass. Outpass means for 2 days you can go to your village and come back. So I am not authorized to give it because I'm a junior officer. So I went to my company commander, a major, and I told him, sir, these 3 boys have done so well, they want to go for outpass. He said, which 3 boys? I told him, sir, Dhyan Singh, Kishan, Devilal. Achha, why do they want to go? So I said, sir, Dhyan Singh's father is very unwell. Kishan Singh's mother is unwell. Somebody's uncle was, very sick. So very genuine reason, 3 of them want to go. Looks at me, says, not required. I was surprised. I said, sir, what? Not required. I was shocked. They have done so well. This bloody brigade tournament we have won, and 3 days outpass I am asking for. I was dejected. When I came out, these 3 were standing outside with the bag and all ready. Sahab, ho gaya sahab? Nahi, mana kar diya sahab. Arey sahab, aap hum soche the naya sahab aaye hain, he'll get it done. Badi isse acha to JCO sahab se karwa lete. I am very dejected. I am feeling like a heel. My heart is in my boot. What? Badi 18 months of training later, I become an officer and I can't even give 3 days outpass. So I go back to the officers' mess. After about half an hour, the barman comes and calls me, कि साहब ने बुलाया आपको bar में. Now it's army, you can't not go, you have to go. So I went, but I'm sulking. So then that company commander of mine, he told me something that I'm sharing with you. He said, in this place, you can talk to me completely frankly. You can talk to me as if you are drunk, even if you are a teetotaler. Because only 3 things will happen. Either you will convince me that you were right, or I will convince you that I was right, or we will disagree, but the CEO will catch hold of my neck. He will not ask you. You have just come last week. He is not going to question you. He is going to ask me. So since the buck stops at me, I will take the decision, but this drink will be on me. So that after you have this drink and you go out, regardless of whether you disagree or agree with me, you will implement the plan with 110% of your capability. And then he told me, Kishan Singh, Devilal, Dhyan Chand, all 3 are cousin brothers. They were going to attend some sister's Mehndi or some such shit. And had you given them leave, you would have gone down in the history of this battalion as a laughing stock. All the Jawans were, kya naya saab aaya, aisa Charlie Kata saab ka. Until the next guy came and did a bigger fuck up than you would be the laughing stock of the battalion. So before you become this rebel without a cause, go do your homework and then come back. We need rituals like that. I'm not suggesting you have a bar, but I'm suggesting, not a bad idea, but I think we need to have rituals, regular rituals like this, which remove the toxins from our organization, because I think we all know that once a little bit of toxin starts building up, the impact that it can have on a healthy body or a healthy organization is disproportionate. You can give it good nutrition, good training, good events like this, but if the toxin is not removed from the organization, the toxin will keep fermenting and damage the entire healthy organization. So, let me come back to the 4, I began this conversation with these 4 diseases where I spoke about arthritis, which is nothing but bureaucracy. How do we cure arthritis? We cure arthritis by doing yoga. What is yoga? Yoga is making 2 parts of the body meet each other, which normally do not meet each other. So if I do like this, it's not yoga. But if I do like this, it is yoga. So similarly, different parts of the organization, different parts of the family, different parts of this organization, which don't meet each other, they should be meeting each other in a comfortable environment, a traumatic environment where they have the ability to know each other much, much better. The second, coronary hardening. I know that most of us are moving towards AI, ChatGPT, all of those things. But there is no replacement of a personal touch. Leadership is a contact sport. You cannot play it remotely. It can't be played on WhatsApp. There is a huge difference between a boss going and putting his hand on somebody's back and saying, very well done, I like it, you have done a good job, or sending an emoji of a thumbs up. There is a huge difference. The emoji of a thumbs up, I'm sure all of us receive a happy birthday celebration message from our bank, insurance company, car company on the day of our birthday, right? How emotional do you feel? You know the bloody program running there which will send it to you. You don't feel emotional at all. But if a friend calls you and tells you, hey, happy birthday to you or whatever, you feel that touch. And that is the element of the heart which coronary hardening we should not allow. Alzheimer again. What do we do to an Alzheimer uncle who's got Alzheimer? We show some family photograph and say, look, this is sister's aunt and this and that. Yeah, I can recognize. Similarly, I think our generation has a responsibility to ensure that the next generation does not get Alzheimer, and we have to take the information that is our tribal knowledge and pass it on through stories. And finally, it is also our job to make sure, whether it's a family, organization, large organization like this, to spot wherever toxins start appearing and to remove that toxin at the earliest stage by calling it out, by having conversation, by settlement, arbitrage or whatever, instead of allowing it to fester inside the body and become a very, very grievous wound. Now, I gave you these principles of leadership. Can you just go one slide more? Yeah. I will now show you how some people are innately gifted with this quality and some people don't have this quality. And how many of you believe in palmistry? Only 3. When I go out, all of you will come. Huh? Okay, good. I'll show you how to make out whether you have the DNA of leadership inside you or not. What I want you to do is take your hands like this. Yeah. Bring your fingers together and your thumb. You see this cup? Very carefully place this cup on your cheek. Yes. Carefully. In the back also. On your cheek. Yeah. There also. On your cheek. Yeah. This is called cheek. This is called chin. So if I stood here and cheek, if I said cheek, you will not do what I tell you to do. You will do what I do. And this is the essence of leadership. You can stand in the stage and talk till cows come home about principles of leadership, this, that, whatever. Your troops will never do what you will tell them to do. Your troops will always do what you will do. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry. Can you go one more slide? One more slide. I'm really sorry about the pointer in the slide and whatever hitch it caused. But for those of you who want a copy of this presentation, if you just scan that QR code, you will get an infographic where I've listed all these 4 diseases and the cures that would be helpful in tackling these 4 diseases. Thank you very much once again. Thank you.